Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Southern Outdoorsman Podcast. Got a good one for you today. I got something to admit to the listeners. We've been holding out on you guys. We've been holding out on you because we've had this guy on before, and I think we teased it a little bit the first time we had him on, that we had some really in-depth deer conversations to have with him, and we're gonna do just that today. Daniel Williams, how you doing, buddy?
Good, man. How y'all doing?
I'm doing good.
Y'all good?
Yeah. Right. Glad to have you here. Jacob, how are you doing?
Doing well. You know,
Jacob Garhold me this morning. I mean, bad.
I sent him in there where we killed a couple birds, and all of a sudden he's like, there ain't no turkeys here. But he's like, oh, there's fresh gobble tracks on the road when I walked in. I'm like, well, they're there, man.
They're there. Yeah.
They might not talk, but, you know.
You just can't call them.
Yeah. I got Garhold big time.
Yeah, you and Mike Pike said the same thing. It's funny because Michael's about to be here, too. So y'all can hash that out on our episode. But, Daniel, super excited to get you on the podcast. This is an episode. You and me have talked about this topic for a while, and really to kind of give the gist to the listeners is how to become effective killing nice bucks when you have very limited time to hunt, whether you're hunting public land or private land, and taking past information in order to figure out literally a year in advance of exactly where you need to hunt based off what you were seeing the previous year or 2 years in certain areas, and actually having a calendar built out, which you showed me in the past, of where you're going to be hunting based off the information you've been getting. And we just had our Patreon meeting, which is our hunter hangout that we're doing every other Thursday. And Drew, one of the guys that was on there, he actually brought this topic up. Like, man, I'm busy. I got young kids, the whole 9 yards. I'm trying to figure out how to become the most effective, hunter I can with very limited time hunting. And I kind of explained part of what we're going to be talking about today, and he got very excited for it. So, again, if you're a listener out there or a viewer on YouTube, and you don't have a ton of time to hunt, and you're busy with your life, work schedule, everything else, this is an episode that's really, I think, going to help you out and really fascinating as well. So, Daniel, appreciate you joining us. I want you to kind of go into some of your background. You were on the podcast back in maybe January time frame.
Yeah, it's kind of late deer season. We'll have to look up the episode number, but in that episode, we kind of just got to know you. We kind of told some hunting stories, your background, where you came from. So people ought to go listen to that one. That was actually a really, really good episode, and I got a lot out of it. But so we're just going to get right into the meat and potatoes with this one. Mm-hmm. What would you say is your main tactic? So like kind of what Jacob just referenced, he gave his version, but like how would you describe what you do?
Like absolutely rut hunting. And I hunt trails and I hunt scrapes specifically. If you take a scrape that you found scouting and you put a camera on it, which we have now, you've got access to cameras. So if you put a camera on it all deer season long, there's a very good chance that for the next 20 years, you're going to get bucks in that same spot. You may have to go in there and make a mock scrape in that same spot, but there will be bucks there for a reason before you ever showed up, and they'll be there from then on. And it's just a matter of how big the deer is and what you're okay with shooting, what you're looking for, what you're targeting. You do that 20 or 30 times or as many times as you want, or properties, then it gives you an idea of what's there and when it's there. So like that's how I hunt, because I mean I've never been, a lot of guys hunt bedding early and stuff like that, but I never had the consecutive days to be able to find one deer and try to figure out where he was at during daylight and the little bit of traveling. So the big travel areas, I just take and find the sign, put the cameras up, and I focus on that specific spot, but it's all rut.
Now, Andrew, I got to cut you off real quick because I know you want to jump in. Daniel, give us some background of what you're doing. Now you're working for yourself. You're a full-time taxidermist. You just have a YouTube channel, everything that you're doing now. So you have a lot more flexibility. But what got you to based off your work schedule, family, everything, the last 15, 20 years, what got you to this point? Like, why did you have to get to this point of trying to be as strategic as possible based off a limited schedule?
Right. Well, I was a meat market manager. I worked in grocery stores. So, like, working retail, you worked all Christmas, all Thanksgiving, New Year's, Easter. Most of deer season, turkey season is holidays, and you work 10, 15 days in a row. So the days that I was off, I had to try to make the best of it. And, growing up when I was a kid, everybody knows those spots where people kill most of the big deer. Especially if you're in a hunting club, it'll be stand whatever. Stand 3 always has a big deer come off of it. And I thought that spot was just good. You didn't know why, but you always thought somebody got lucky on that stand, or that stand's due and somebody needs to hunt it. And we never paid that much attention about when the deer were killed there or anything else. You just knew that if you sat there every time you got a chance to, eventually you'd get lucky. And over a period of time, I just cut out all the other stands because I couldn't come but once every 2 or 3 weeks, maybe for 2 days. And I would just sit there every single time. Daylight to dark, I'd sit there all day long, and eventually I'd kill me a nice buck. And it kind of started with that. And then as I got a little bit older, I started noticing specific areas where deer were getting killed, where it wasn't just stand 3, it was stand 3, 4, and 5. And then as I got a little bit older, I started paying more attention to dates, because it was like, if I'm off, let's say I'm off after Christmas, when everybody else, like if the rut, like let's say the rut is quote unquote Christmas week, and everybody's like, that's when I'm taking off. Everybody's off and they hunt those dates, and that's when everybody kills the most deer. A lot of times because it's when the most people are there. But maybe the rut is going on then. But what I started noticing was the days that I was off, I could find where deer were at those days. And that's when I killed those deer in those spots. And the more I had to do that, the more I paid attention to the exact dates to make sure I just was off work on the right days. Well, then they invented game cameras. So it was like you could actually go in, and rather than using where you had seen deer, where other deer had been killed, you go in there and put up cameras. But like even before cameras, like if you've got past information, like let's say you've got backlogs on books, or even your own deer, like if you had no information to go on, I mean, you've had this conversation before, like if you show me a map and you know how to scout, if people know what to look for. You got a question?
No, keep going.
Oh, okay.
I got a point we're going to talk about after this. Keep going.
Well, like if you know how to scout, and y'all have got enough podcasts and videos, like people can listen to y'all's content and they can learn how to find a buck. So if you can find a buck, if you can find sign, that's all you need to do is find sign. If you can do that, then you can put a camera on it. And then once you find out when those deer are there, then all you have to do is be off those days. Now, if you can't, then you just need more cameras or more information. So like somebody that's got their own lease, let's say somebody's hunting family land for 20 years. Well, a lot of my clients, like it doesn't do me any good to give somebody bad information, because I'm a taxidermist. So like the more big deer people kill that are my clients, the better off I am. So like if they come in there and they're like, man, you know, my dad killed a 160 10 years ago off of this side of this cliff, but it was just like a fluke accident. Like he was on the side of a cliff and he couldn't hunt nowhere else. Just went and sat down and this buck come up the hill. I'm like, well, how many times have y'all hunted there again? And they're like, never, man. It's on the side of a cliff. Like must have been like an accident. I'm like, no. Like if he killed a 160 on the side of a cliff, like the biggest deer on that property is on the side of that cliff right now. Like, you know, and I actually had that happen last year. A guy went in there and legitimately, I got him to look back at the dates. This was like 10 years ago, and this deer was killed on a specific date. He was actually going to be off that day about 2 weeks later. I told him, I said, do not go in there at all. Those days, if you can be off those few days before or after, go in there and sit there every single day. And the first day he went in there, he killed about 130-inch 7-point. The next day, his wife went in there and killed a 140 10-point out of the same exact tree. And they've never hunted. It was their lease. They've had it for like 20 years. And that's the only 3 times they've ever sat there. You know what I mean? Like after killed a 160, they never even hunted it again in that spot, because it wasn't where they had planned on going. It's where they ended up, and they killed that buck and just didn't give it a second thought. But it doesn't, like a lot of people are worried about why deer do what they do. If you kind of, especially if you're just getting started, it's too much to try to understand and comprehend. If you can see when they're doing what they're doing and then hunt them, you'll understand why they do what they do. You'll start to notice when you're scouting what they're doing and where they're coming from.
I want to jump back just to make sure that people caught that, because you mentioned that like that deer, the 160 had been killed, you said 10 years?
A long time ago, yeah.
Years before, and just based on the date that deer was killed, you were
Correct.
Like, go in there next week.
Yeah, I actually told them, because they were laughing about it, and they were like, that just sounds ridiculous, you know, but I had, I won't say this to say this, but like I had a lease right by the house that was 1,700 acres back several years ago. And what really got me focused in on the dates was I had 1,700 acres and I had exclusive access to it. Nobody else could hunt it. I did. And I went in there, put up cameras where I needed to and everything. And all of a sudden, I didn't have a deer on camera for like 5 months. And I'm like, where's all these deer at? Because I know there's scrapes, I know there's sign. Well, I left them, and I was checking them about every 2 weeks. I didn't have anywhere else to hunt. It was right when I first moved, and I was just going in there and checking cameras and trying to hunt. Well, all of a sudden, I had about 10 or 15 bucks show up, and they were there for about 10 days, and then they left. And out of 365 days I had cameras up, I had bucks. Those 10 to 12 days was the only days of the whole year that I had a buck on camera. And I did it for several years in a row. I think it was 6 years. Ended up killing 8 bucks out of one tree within about a 6-day period. and had no bucks on camera the rest of the entire year in that whole spot. And what I learned from that was it was not hunting pressure. It was not nocturnal movement. It wasn't any of that. Those bucks were not there. They were somewhere else the rest of the time, and they came there. And the more I did it, the more I realized, because I think out of 8 deer, I think I killed 4 on December the 4th on one specific day. So I started, does have got a 3-day estrus cycle. So if you break down an estrus group, because that's usually what people go by, is first off, it's really broad. It'll be our rut is this week. Mm-hmm. Well, you can forget that. Go down, break that down into these doe groups is this week. Well, no, not that either. Go down to this doe is 3 days. The camera I put behind my house, me and you talked about this last year, just as like an experiment. I put a camera literally 100 yards from the back of my house, put out a corn pile, just see what would happen. Well, I had a group of 9, there was a group of 5 does and a group of 4, 2 different family units that would fight each other over the corn pile. They'd be there at the same time sometimes, but hated each other. It was funny. Well, I mean, they'd literally be like punching each other.
Typical women.
I know. It's insane.
I'm joking. I'm joking. All the women listeners.
That's Jacob. Jacob Myers. Yeah. What's that email address?
Jacob@thesouthernoutdoorsman.com.
Right. But anyway, these does came in and they showed up I put the camera out probably the 1st of August, and the does showed up about September and were there daily and nightly. I mean, they were in there all the time. Well, about, November the 10th, something like that, I had a spike show up. And the next day, a 6-point showed up. Over the next week, I had 6 different bucks come to that spot. And after about 10 days, they all left. And I have not gotten a picture of them after that. And they were, specifically, I've got 15 acres. And I remember I told you, I will give you permission to hunt my property for 355 days a year. And you can sit there every single day for free. If you'll let me hunt that 1 week, and I'll kill 6 bucks and you'll never see one. That's how specific it is. And I can prove that on every piece of property. Like, I've done it over and over and over again.
And by the way, guys, we're not talking about hunting out of season, okay? It's just
right. And we're also not talking about hunting beds. So all you bed guys, it's like, no. Like, this is the rut. Like, this is where most people struggle that hunt beds, and the rut hits, and they're like, well, it's too unpredictable. It's not. What the deer you're going to see, it's going to be harder to target a specific buck. But the advantage to it is, you can take those areas if you can find. And what I like about scrapes is if you look down a historical rub line and find multiple scrapes, 9 times out of 10, over half of those scrapes are going to be at an intersection. It may not be an intersection that you recognize, but as you get to learn about terrain and everything else, there will be saddles a mile away, or there will be a creek system, or there will be a ridge line with fingers coming off of it or something, and those scrapes will be in spots. If you remember us looking at your map, when we were going through there, and I kept zooming out, I was like, well, hang on a second. I'd zoom out, zoom out, zoom out. You can see how the deer are traveling based on the terrain and by the cover, where the cutovers are. The deer are going to follow those, and it may be over a 10-mile range where it may not be one buck. He may not go 10 miles, but all the deer in general are following these cutovers across the entire, terrain. Well, as you find those scrapes where they're supposed to be, where the deer are traveling, it's basically intersections. So what you may do is where you've got a guy that is hunting a buck on a point, this bedding. You've got another guy hunting a buck in this drainage and a guy hunting a buck on a saddle. Well, if you find this hub, this spot where you're getting pictures of 4 or 5 bucks during a 3 or 4 day period every year, you can sit there for 3 days and possibly see every buck that 5 different guys is hunting. Well, then 3 days later, you move and go over to the next one that your dates are at. So you can constantly move, and really, honestly, what you're doing is hunting the rut for 2 months. The rut is not this week, like at this club. The rut is those 3 days when this doe is in heat. And what I started, the more cameras I put out, the more pictures I got of the same buck completely on different ends of our entire property that were there on the dates they were supposed to be. And the bucks knew where to be when that doe was in heat.
So there's a couple things we got to bring it back down.
Yep.
Bring it back down. Okay. Number one, to simplify for everybody what we're talking about annual patterns. Number one. Okay. So when you're talking about using these trail cameras and putting them specifically, I know you like scrapes, and again, like high traveled areas with scrapes and also trails, is you're looking for that date range of when a quality of buck that you're looking to hunt is showing up preferably during daylight, or does it matter if it's at night too?
It has to be during daylight.
Okay.
If you get nighttime pictures, you might as well throw the pictures in the garbage. It's not really – it's going to tell you a buck's in the area, and there's a very good chance you might be able to kill him during the rut because you may just be a little off of where he's at. He may not be traveling that far. But what I've also noticed is sometimes – well, more times than not, you will not get the picture of one buck twice, and they're usually going the same direction. So some of it, I believe, and this is just me saying this, but I believe that a buck is not going to be traveling around, walking around during daylight unless he's at the mercy of a hot doe, not during the rut. You know what I mean? If it's during the rut and he's there at 11 in the morning walking around the middle of nowhere, because a lot of the deer I kill is in wide open hardwoods. Like I'm not hunting thickets. You know what I mean? I'm not. But it's where he's at every year during that day. And it may not be because there's a doe in heat where I'm sitting. I probably saw 2 does last year. Like, and the only ones I saw were getting chased by bucks. But it's when they're coming through there going to wherever it is they're going. So there may be a specific spot on a trail where 4 or 5 bucks come by in a few day period going to a spot where there may be a hot doe for a few days then. So what I think is happening is you just have to be right there during those days because he's there during daylight. Whereas when he gets where he's going, he may not do a lot of traveling until it's dark, until he goes to the next spot or whatever, because, they're going to move during the day and they're going to move at night. But if you get pictures at night, all your pictures are at night. That's tended to be more, you'll get some mixed, obviously, here or there. But there's going to be a period of time when you're going to have all the bucks are going to be there.
Well,
I want to.
There's so much to talk about.
I know. So the first time I've been interested in this for years, and I've been kind of aware of it for a long time, and I've been trying to implement it, but I haven't gone as in depth with it as you have. But the first time I ever actually executed this with success was actually me and Pike were out, me and the Dilla, who's about to be here. We went out and we put cameras out this one year all over this place, and we got pictures of like a crazy wide buck one year. And he was using this glade and saddle that we talked about on last or 2 weeks ago episode. And that's where I killed my glade buck. So I went in, I used the dates and I went in there and I killed a buck like within 2 or 3 days of when we were getting all these really nice daylight pictures. And so that's the first time I've actually utilized it. And ever since then, I've been constantly just trying to get cameras out and just let them soak. And even if like there's a couple times this year where I was trying to find like a really good scrape to put a camera on and I just could not find one, and I just put it on like literally anything that had deer sign because I'm like I just need this camera to like get some data for me, and because now I look at that data like so differently, it's so valuable. But I want to get into the nitty gritty of what makes a tactic work, and going all the way back to the beginning. You mentioned about scrapes, and you're like, they'll be using that for 20 years.
Yep.
Dive into that a little bit more about how the scrape, the deer aren't there because, or the deer aren't there because of the scrape. The scrape is there because of the deer are there.
Absolutely,
right?
Yeah. And what you just said makes a lot of sense. Trying to find that scrape to put a camera on, like the thing that opened my eyes more than anything, probably about 5 years ago, because the more you believe in the system and the more it keeps working, the more you analyze every little bit of it. And what we started noticing is the bigger deer are usually the first ones to show up. Sometimes it will be on the very back end, late, but it will be after all the other bucks have already left. But what I believe is happening is, I think as the bucks get older, they show up waiting on that doe to go into heat. The young bucks tend to not leave the area as much. Even a really like a yearling buck will stay in there with the does. And they're the ones that's running the deer around everywhere, and they're staying the longest, and they're making the most sign. What we noticed last year, this is a great example, when Jeremy shot his 8-point over at we went in there 2 days before that, and I ended up shooting a buck. There was no sign. There was no sign anywhere. And when we came back to the truck, I was like, well, man, like, I've got a deer down, but there is no sign. Like, all the sign that we found last year, like, it's not there. The deer was. I mean, I was glad I saw one, but the deer just, the sign was not there. So, anyway, the next day we did not go. We were tired from dragging deer. But the following day, went back in there. Jeremy shot. We come back out. He said, you're not going to believe this, but you cannot walk without stepping in sign. And I said, really? And he said, yeah. I said, well, there's 2 scrapes in here that wasn't there, a couple of days ago. Well, we go over there, and there's like 30-something scrapes, literally. Like there was that many. You could not, every single branch that was hanging over the ground had a scrape under it. And I'm talking about huge. If you went in there in January or February and did some postseason scouting, you would swear there were $100 in there and it was the greatest spot you ever found in your life. But I truly believe either that one buck made all of that sign, or there may have been two. It wasn't like the woods were just run over with deer. But that was the difference. Had I not been sitting with no sign, I wouldn't have killed. And the next one that I killed, there was no sign yet. But there were giant scrapes there the year before. So the best tactic is to postseason scout, find the sign. That shows you where the bucks are at. But when you put a camera up, you have to do it in like September, before the season ever starts. But you have to what I do is I make a mock scrape, because you know where the scrape was at, and you know where the scrape could be. That's where they want to be anyway. Even if they weren't going to make a scrape there that year, you can go ahead and do it, and they're going to check it. If you make a mock scrape in your backyard, you're going to get does and bucks on it. I mean, they just do that. So if you can make one where you know one existed and put your camera on it, and don't check it. Like if it's a spot that you don't know about, unless you just really have nowhere to go and just want to roll the dice, don't even go in there. Just put your camera up as surveillance for an entire season. Don't mess with it. Don't put your scent in there. Don't park your truck there. You know what I mean? Don't let a deer know that you're anywhere in the world, and just leave that camera running and go get it in February. And when you pull it, sit down with a calendar, and don't do it on your phone, because if you do it on your phone, you'll forget it and you'll never look at that stuff again. You'll go back, you'll miss stuff. Get you a paper calendar and a pen. And as you get those cameras, number every one. Make sure you number your cameras. Make sure you number your SD cards, because if you don't, you've got a whole bunch of information with no location, which is useless. So on your calendar, we name our spots. It's like you're in a hunting club. You got the so-and-so hole and the so-and-so spot. And what we'll do is we'll take a camera, set it down, get the number off the SD card with a spot, and then we'll take the calendar in. Every single date, as we're clicking through the computer, every time there's a buck there, during daylight, we'll write it down on that date. Well, then if you go through there, even the nighttime pictures, we've narrowed it down to about a 10-day period. Typically in 10 days, there's going to be a start and a finish. And if we're going to take off work or try to go, like if you had to go on your off days, let's say you get 1 or 2 days off a week. Well, if you get enough of that in a calendar, because we filled up 3 whole months. I mean, every day of 3 months, we know what tree we're going to be in. So if you've got that information, what we do is let's just say you get a buck on the 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th. There's a buck in that spot. Well, let's say that you're off, on the 2nd or whatever. You don't have those dates. Well, we will take those dates where the bucks are at, give a 10-day window, before and after, and we'll write down that same spot on every day. And then you just got your calendar. So when it gets time for a gun hunt or it's time for an off day, you open the calendar, look at the date, and it tells you get in this tree. And then you take your truck and you go and you get in that tree. No questions asked. It's 100% confidence in what you're doing. There's no hanging and hoping. And there's a very, very good chance that you're going to see a buck, rather than a buck's there. And this is a good example. 2 years ago, when we first started new property, trying to hunt some new property, we went in there and hung all of our cameras. Well, we didn't have anywhere to hunt because we never scouted before, not there. So we started going in there and just going to where the most sign was when the rut is, quote unquote, in these areas. Well, we saw 2 bucks in 4 weeks. And the thing is, we pulled the cameras in February and had 20 bucks in there that were all there. We were just missing them, the wrong dates. And people think they sit and sit and sit, and they find these awesome places, and they're like, I found the best place in the world. And they go and they sit for a month, and all of a sudden in their brain it clicks, and it's like, I have messed this spot up. I've scared the deer out of here. I've done ruined it. I've blown the deer, and they don't go back in there because they're like, well, then 2 days later, 4 bucks show up in there. They just hadn't been there. They don't even know the guy's there. They were 10 miles down the road with some other does. So like when you've got those dates, man, you cannot, especially if you're hunting public land, you don't have to park your truck there until they're ready. By the time your truck's there, it's too late for the other guys. You know what I mean? Because you only got a window of about 3 days usually, and they're gone. Mm-hmm. And when I say gone, I mean like you won't get a picture of a buck the rest of the whole year. Like if you start checking those cameras, if you run cameras all deer season and check them, it'll make you feel stupid at how often you'll sit in a spot for no reason. Absolutely no reason. Even if there's no pressure, you completely waste your time. But when we started doing that, I went from went from killing like a buck a year, hopefully, to seeing 6 or 8 nice deer, and usually shooting 2 or 3. You know, and like I said, I mean, I haven't killed any giants yet, but at the same time, like it's I believe it's possible with whatever size buck you've got. I mean, so far every property we've been to, by doing that, we've gotten pictures of every deer that was some of the biggest deer on the property. It's just a matter of which one comes through there while you're sitting there on those dates. And there's been a few that were big that they just happened to come through there the day before we were there or the day after. You know what I mean? So we could have had an opportunity at them, but just didn't.
Man, you're selling yourself short. You've killed some really nice deer. So I want to talk about the sign aspect a little bit more because that's a really interesting topic. And we have 2 years of camera data in a specific spot now. I think we've told you a little bit about this.
Yeah.
It's where we both killed bucks in there, not last season, the season before last. We both killed bucks in there, and we ran cameras all that year, and we ran cameras all this year. And it's just like the example you gave. You go in there, and there's a couple mega scrapes.
Yeah,
he went to one the other day to grab one of our cameras, and this scrape is like 15 feet wide.
Yeah.
It is stupid. And
almost double. It was insane because I had Greg with me, and he's like, "That's a scrape." I'm like, "Yes, that is a scrape."
Right.
And it's like
so it's just
30 feet.
Yeah.
It is
gigantic.
One of the big ones, like over years, especially in the swampland and flatland, like down in Selma, they would start getting to be holes. It would look like a mineral lick.
Well,
but
and
every year, I mean, for years, 20 years, there'd be a scrape there, you know.
Well, and these scrapes have been there for a long time. You can tell. And then there's another one under a big sparkleberry that's just, we covered it in a podcast a couple weeks ago and showed videos where you could see the scrape, but that one's dug out like you're talking about. But you go walking around the woods there, especially if you're in there during the rut, which, you know, the 2-week period that they're rutting pretty good in there, it kind of seems like they rut earlier than the surrounding area. You go in there and you just go walk around in the daylight, and there are scrapes everywhere.
Right.
It is silly how many scrapes there are. And after 2 years of running camera in there, we'll have doe groups and we'll have small bucks on camera almost every single day in daylight. I mean, they're in there. But then you get like pulses of mature bucks.
Yep.
Like here they come. You get a mature buck on camera, and these are cell cameras. So, and this year we got to where we could almost predict it, where it's like, oh, mature buck just showed up. You can bet for the next 2 or 3 days, there's going to be at least one more show up.
Right.
And usually it was like 2 or 3
during daylight.
Daylight, and there's like spurts of activity.
Yep.
And we've got 2 years of that now. So I guess that's where like we could go astray. I mean, we didn't kill one in there this year. We didn't hunt it as much as we should have. But it's like you're just kind of hunting the wrong dates. And we're focusing that around the rut, and you keep mentioning the rut, but I'm curious about how it might translate into early or late season too. Like if you're getting a buck, let's say your rut's in December and you're getting a buck like, I don't know, the last week of October on a feed tree, does that carry the same weight for you as the rut pictures? Or
Well, I mean, if a buck's coming to a feed tree early season, there's a good chance he's in there almost every day. You know what I mean? Maybe not every single day, but the most predictable movement is going to be summertime, early season. They're not really going to travel. They're going to bed, they're going to eat. You know, and it's more of a one line back and forth. If you put up multiple cameras, like on bedding and on food, a lot of times you'll get the same buck going to and from. Whereas all of our cameras, I'll have 10 bucks on camera going one way. You know what I mean? And you can put a camera a mile away, and the same buck's coming the other direction, making a loop. Kind of what we noticed was they kind of go in a straight line typically early season. When the rut starts, it's usually a loop. I've rarely seen a straight line back and forth of bucks checking does unless they're in some kind of a hub or something where they're just go back and forth winding. But usually what they're doing is hitting separate creek systems, and they're jumping, you know, going across saddles and stuff and going around those thermal hubs and making a loop. So the cool thing about that is your approach. So like where y'all are at, if you find some big scrapes, well, let's say all these little bucks are tearing the ground to pieces. I mean, a lot of times they're the ones that make the 40 scrapes. You know, and the big bucks show up 2 days out of the whole year.
Yep.
But I think a lot of times, like a lot of our big deer show up before the scrapes are ever on the ground. So I think a lot of people that try to come and find a deer, say, like if they find big scrapes, big rubs, and know there's a good deer in the area, they may try to wait on the scrapes to show up. And then they're like, okay, he's here, and start trying to hunt him. Well, what we noticed is a lot of times the more mature deer would be in and out of there before the sign ever showed up. And then once that doe has already gone into heat, he may already be with her. But the little bucks kind of key in on it, and they don't know what to do. They're in there just running around trying to find her, looking for her, making scrapes, and all of a sudden all this sign shows up. Well, he's gone for the year. You know, he's already, by the time you find the sign, you're behind him the whole year. So what we started doing is when you've got those dates, like if you've got a deer that's usually there around the 3rd, well, if you show up on the 1st, I mean, you're liable to kill him on the 1st or 2nd before there's ever even a deer being seen.
Yeah.
You know, and all of a sudden you got a dead deer. And then you go to the next spot. You know?
And it makes perfect sense because, you know, if that deer is 4 or 5 years old, he's had seasons to acquaint himself with the area.
Yeah, he already knows. And
Yeah.
the young bucks just don't. It's just a little bit different. Now, sometimes we've noticed a few times where, like, later on in that 10-day period I'm talking about, later on you may have this giant that shows up at the end of that period. And I think a lot of that is because he knows he may have already been with a doe that was somewhere else. And he might know where another doe is going into estrus, and he comes through that spot every year, those same dates, but is not going to that doe that all the other bucks were on the week before. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah.
But there again, it kind of, that's something we're kind of wanting to target on this year. That's what I was telling Jeremy. Like, I want to try to figure out if you can pattern one specific buck based on even more specific dates. Because, like, for the last 3 years, we've gotten 2 really nice deer within a 2-day period in 2 different spots. And there's 10 days where there's a lot of good deer in there, like 4 or 5 nice shooter bucks. But the big deer are there on the same dates, almost exactly. It's like they've got calendars, but really close to the same exact dates. And it's not in sync with all the other group of bucks. It's within a 10-day period, but you may have like 4 or 5 in a 2-day period. And then you may have 2 big ones 6 days later or something like that. And I think you can really key in on that. Like, if you're trying to kill these mature deer, don't hunt the little ones. Wait on these dates and sit there. And like I said, with enough of those dates, and you can even go back, like, some people can't afford 100 cameras. I mean, we run about 6 or 7, and that's all we even want to check, you know. But you can also go back at what you've seen. If you see a buck chasing a doe, go ahead and back it up 8 days and put it in your calendar, because more than likely the mature deer was there 8 days ago. You know what I mean? If you go in there and find a fresh scrape, go back 6 days, because the mature deer was probably there, you know, a week ago before that scrape got put down. And it will give you a real good idea. As long as you write all that stuff down or use a voice recorder on your phone or something and document that in that calendar to check the following year to put a camera on.
Let's get into the details of camera placement, because for this to work really effectively, you're going to have to be somewhat decent at figuring out where to actually put your camera. And I just gave the example of the place that we hunted that has like 8,000 scrapes in like a 40-acre area. That place, we just put the cameras on like the gigantic, obvious community scrapes. Now, switching gears to my club, there is no deer sign on my club. It's ridiculous.
Right.
I can't find any rubs. The bucks are there. Like, I've got, last year there was probably 4 different bucks I would have been really happy to shoot. I killed one of them, and then one of the other ones got killed, and then the other 2 lived. And there's a bunch of up and comers.
Is there a lot of does?
I mean, there's enough does. There's not like a ton
like
of
the
does.
competition's there. They just don't. Those bucks just don't put down sign.
I mean, for instance, we were getting a bachelor group of 5 bucks hanging out on this creek crossing, and I was getting a doe group of 5 does.
Right.
And those are the only deer that were on that camera.
How much thick land is there? Like,
Plenty.
is all of it accessible?
Oh no, there's a lot of thickets.
Have you ever? When you say thicket, is it more cut over? Or is it like small pines?
Both. We got everything.
Have you ever busted up in them pines and looked for sign?
Yeah, I've got up in the pines a decent bit. I found more rubs in there, but really what I was looking for is a community scrape. And I've been in the club 2 years, and I found it mid-January, and the week after I found it, Mike killed his buck, which is in your shop right now.
Yeah,
on swinging around that scrape.
Right.
And when I found it, I was like, son of a gun. Like, I wish I had found this stupid thing 2 years ago, because then I could have had 2 years of data on this
Absolutely.
thing, you know?
Yeah.
But it's still not like it's not like a eye-popping scrape or
well, with a
anything
lot
like
of
that.
thicket too, like some of those big huge scrapes, you get a lot of nighttime pictures.
Yep.
Where you got bucks coming and hanging out. They may even be bedded in it or bedded beside it. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. What we typically like to do, usually those big scrapes are either going to be like in in a bottom next to a creek at the bottom of a thermal hub, or like they may be in a saddle or something like
This
that.
one's smack in the middle of a saddle.
Okay, and it would be great in the morning. You know what I mean? It would be a great one, but it also may be such a crossing. The scrape may get bigger and bigger just because they're using it constantly rather than a whole bunch of bucks using it too.
Yeah.
It may just be one deer using it all the time or yearly, but at the same time, you can take, like if you've got a whole bunch of thicket, like that property by the house I was hunting, it had a lot of pine thicket that was really small pines, and there was no sign anywhere. You never found sign. So we just had to key in on historical rubs because there weren't that many fresh rubs. You know, we almost didn't think there was deer there. But we found a couple of historical rub lines, and we followed those. Once that season ended, we went in there scouting and followed those rubs into those thickets. And the second you hit the thicket, within 10 yards, you'd find a scrape. And the scrape would be under trees that weren't 2 foot off the ground. Like, you wouldn't even know the scrape was there because the pines are not big enough to walk through. It looks like an overgrown cutover, but they're in there scraping. But they did not do it in the open woods in that area, especially in like an SMZ. A lot of times, if a deer have got an SMZ that is surrounded in pine thicket or cutover, they very, very rarely will stop and make sign. They don't have time. They're trying to get in and out. It's the same way if you're dealing with logging roads, especially if you're hunting public and you've got well-traveled logging roads that are not accessible by vehicle. A lot of those deer cross those roads if you find saddles, stuff like that. But you're not going to find these scrapes and rubs all along the edges of that road, because when those deer get to it, it may be the best looking saddle you've ever seen on a topography map, but that logging road may travel the top of it. Well, the logging road, I mean, if that logging road is 20 years old, let's say it's not the main road going in, but you can tell that every hunter that walks in there uses that logging road to access this area. Well, if you look at the top topography map and you say this saddle needs scout, and it's a mile back, it's perfect, topography is great, and you don't realize that road's there. Well, you get in there and you realize there's this old, road bed, and there's a trail down through there where people have been breaking limbs off, and you can tell every hunter and their mother's been in there walking. Well, when you get to your saddle, there will be nothing. There will be no trail. There will be no sign, no scrapes, rubs, nothing. But if you go off down in there, you're going to find it. 9 times out of 10, it's going to be what you need. And 9 times out of 10, people do not know that. So, like when you find that, if you can find those in between areas, like especially historical rubs, that's usually where we put our cameras. So, like if you've got a spot where you've got these gigantic scrapes. These deer are either spending a lot of time there and at night and everything else, or there's a bunch of deer using it, and it's hard to access those spots without blowing deer out. Even if at any other time of the year, it's usually like the meeting point. But if you can find historical rubs, and fresh rubs are fine too, but I mean, historical rubs, it's just like we were talking about with scrapes. If you find a historical rub line, you can kill a deer on that rub line the rest of your life. I mean, it may be a spike or it may be a 12 point, but the bucks are going to travel that trail because of the thermals or whatever it is, the cover of the thermals. It's one of the two, and that's where the spot is. Even though you can't see it or smell it, they know. And along that line, where your best access is, like let's say you've got a road that horseshoes in on the top of a bluff or the top of a ridge line, and you find this scrape down in this spot. Well, if you can follow historical rubs, which are pretty common, to a point that you can access closer to the road, make your mock scrape there along that trail. Put your camera up perpendicular to where the deer does not know it's there and catch him walking. Don't put it necessarily on like a big community scrape where he's going to spend some time. You know what I mean? Make you a little mock scrape, little bitty small mock scrape where he may stop, pause, smell, walk. You don't want him looking for a camera or giving him reason to stand around in there. And you also don't want to go busting up into their community scrape and hang a camera with your scent on it. Even though it's there early, and we haven't had a lot of trouble with deer seeing our cameras, but we're putting them up in September and we don't check them for 4 months. So we're not even hunting the spot. We're going in there. When we check that camera, if it don't have deer on it, we never go back in there again ever. It's just X. I don't care. But if it's got sign on it, you're going to get pictures of bucks. If there's scrapes in there the year before, there's going to be bucks on your camera, just no matter how big they are. Now, once we get those pictures, we never, ever hang a camera in there again. I don't care what the buck looks like. If there's a buck in there that's big enough to shoot, there will always be a buck in there big enough to shoot sooner or later. You know what I mean? It may not be the next year. If one gets killed, you may have to wait a year or two for another big one, because you know how people do. It don't matter if it's public or private. If there's a big buck in an area nowadays, everybody's got a picture of him. People got cameras out. If you think there's never been a person in an area, there's been 10. You know what I mean? So, I guarantee you're going to get a picture of a guy on your camera if you think you're in the middle of nowhere. But if you've got pictures, if you've got those specific dates of a good deer, he's going to be there. And once he's dead, he was there for a reason, and another one's going to take his place. Either one that's that big already, that was territorial, he wouldn't let him live there, or you just may have to wait for another one to grow up. But people gravitate to that spot because of that deer. Once that deer is dead and they quit getting pictures, the next few years, they'll leave. Same way with turkey hunters. I mean, you get a bunch of turkeys in an area, you'll have 400 trucks for about 5 years. Once all them turkeys are dead, people leave, and they forget about the spot. 10 years later, you got the spot to yourself. It's the best place you got for about 3 years. You know, and then everybody shows back up. You got to go back to the other place. And that's the way bucks are. Like big bucks, they always come to that same spot. They're always, once you find those places.
We gotta explain historical rubs in detail. Okay. So when you say you go and find those historical rubs, and you even use the phrase like, if you find that, you can kill a buck on that trail the rest of your life. What exactly are you talking about with historical rubs? Because, you know, you could go out right now and you could find some whip rubs from last year. You could even find some bigger rubs from last year. Are you talking about trees that have been rubbed multiple years in a row, or just any rub?
No, any tree. The best, our rule of thumb is we create the loop. We will not even hang a camera until we find an entire loop where bucks are traveling. Like that rut loop is what I call it. What we do, you know where the scrapes are at postseason. So we'll find a scrape, mark it, okay? Well, you can't just put a camera. You can. I mean, if you've got very limited time, but I mean, if you've got 4 or 5 hours, don't spend it on 5 different places. Spend it in one. You know, and it may mean 6, 8 miles, but stay in that area. Find a second scrape or a rub. It's easy to find fresh rubs postseason. They're easy to see, even easier than scrapes. So if you'll mark every scrape and every rub that you can find in that area, all you need is 2. If you can find a scrape and a rub, even if it's a new scrape and an old rub, I don't care if it's a whip rub. I don't care if it's a tiny little tree that's been just touched. Mark it. Mark every one of them. And all you do is make a dotted line. Like as soon as you get 2 spots, you got a line. You find another spot, you got another line. You find another spot, you got another line. And pretty soon, it just makes a big loop. And then you can look at your access. So then you've got wind direction, you've got access, you've got thermals, you've got thickets, you've got lines of travel where the people are going to park. You know where everybody else is going to access it. You know how the deer are going to get pushed if they're spooked. That loop will tell you every single thing that you need to know of how you need to hunt those deer. And when you find the spot that's the most ideal, like let's say you can get to them for 100 yards from the truck on a north wind at this spot. Mm-hmm. Well, as long as it's on the loop, it don't matter if you got rubs the size of your pinky finger. If there's a rub this big around, or the size of a softball, a half a mile away on that loop, it's the same deer or the same group of deer. And you can kill that giant right there where there ain't no sign at all as long as it's on that loop. So, as you follow that loop, you're going to notice in the terrain why he's there. And every bit of that topography, people usually pick that apart. And it's like, I want to hunt this saddle. But they don't look at it like these deer are traveling these 6 saddles, this giant area. It's like if you hunt a part of that loop like that on those dates, then those deer, you're hunting a bunch of different deer in that same area, but you can pick your best spot to kill them based on those rubs. But I don't worry about the size of the rub or the age or whether they've been rubbed year after year. Now, I mean, it's a good sign if it is, but I expect it to be. Even if a tree's not rubbed twice, I 100% could go in there. Like if you find a whole bunch of old rubs that are the size of a basketball on a bunch of beech trees, for instance, if you find 10 of them from 3 years ago, the biggest deer in that whole area lived there at one point in time. He may be dead, but I promise you, if you hunt that spot, if you didn't know anything about the whole area, dates or anything, and you just sat there every day of deer season for the next 10 years, you'd kill the biggest buck of your life. You know what I mean? Like another one will be there because he was. And it don't matter how old or how new it is. If a mature buck uses a spot, then mature bucks use that spot.
But all that to say too that a lot of people get caught in like a little doom loop trying to hunt buck sign, kind of like we just mentioned earlier, and they get frustrated with it. So all that to say, your confidence in the rubs kind of ties back into the trail cameras and the historical data, right?
And the dates.
Dates.
And the dates. Like if you've got that loop, for instance, some of those loops are huge. I mean, some of them are way bigger, and I don't know that those bucks even make a full loop in a day. You know, it may be a full loop in 2 weeks, but it may be 6 different does with 3-day estrus cycles. You know, so you may have, if you've got 5 cameras out on one loop, which is typically what we do, we may not be hunting, 10, 20 miles apart. We may have 3 or 4 spots that are 10 miles apart, but each spot has a few cameras on it on that loop. And all the deer, like let's say on the north side of the loop, you may have 4 bucks that come by there in 3 days, 4 days. Well, then if you go on the south side or wherever, there may be 2 or 3 bucks come by there 3 days, 4 days later. And it may not be the same deer. It may be 1 or 2 of the same deer and then some other deer from the next creek system that come by there. And they kind of start, it's like if you make a circle, like that's originally when I first did this before game cameras, I took the club map and took the stands where people were killing all the bucks. And I would take pins. We had 5 years of historical data from deer that were killed. And all the mature bucks that were killed, I took just regular old push pins and a piece of cork board, laid a map down on it of our club, and I took a piece of paper and wrote the date and the stand of where these deer were killed. Well, on each date, I would just put the peg on that stand. And I just kept doing that for 5 years of data. And what I ended up with was 3 circles of pins on that map, completely across the property. And the first deer were killed November, and the last deer were killed at the end of January. And when you've got, like, let's say you've got 40 bucks killed in 5 years. Well, if all 40 of them are killed in 3 spots, and all of them are within a 10-day period in those spots, you just deleted the entire club other than those circles for 4 months. I mean, you realize how much time you've wasted in the last 10 years. You look at it, it really makes you mad almost. You're like, what am I doing, But you can go to the center of those circles, and that's where the most sign is. When you go to the center, the epicenter of all of that, you will find, because usually those pins are going to either be on a food plot or on a place like the side of a pretty hillside, like somewhere that's easy to get to. And those bucks are living somewhere in the middle of that is why they're there. But sometimes what you'll end up with, like, is you may have, especially in bad terrain or real thick cover, you might have a circle where you've got several cameras. And these bucks may be here on one side on these dates and this side on these dates. Well, on the next creek system, you may have several other cameras with deer there on specific dates in specific spots. Well, some of those places, those circles will overlap. And you end up with 4 bucks in this circle and 4 bucks in this circle. And all of a sudden on this camera, there's 6 or 8 different bucks. And that's our favorite spots, where you can get these, where those loops intersect, your odds just double. And the more of those you can find that intersect is really, that's what you're really looking for. It's like taking a great idea and doubling it,
Yeah, we talked about that on our terminology episode where we had, again, GPS data from Auburn that we got where these deer were collared on public land as well as some clubs. I think at 6 different sites across the state here in Alabama. And we broke it down, put it on a map, and made some videos out of it that are on our Patreon. And what we noticed was kind of exactly what you just mentioned. There was this big, in one particular place on a WMA, in a place that I had hunted before, which was aggravating, looking at the GPS data. I'm like, gosh, dang, I was all over these things.
Right.
And I never saw them. I never killed anything there. But anyways, these deer, there was a ridge that kind of divided where these 2 bucks were living. And they would both go to this ridge. And the buck that lived to the south never went to the north side of it. The buck that lived to the north never went to the south side. Right. But they would both hit that ridge. And it kind of got us thinking about, like, man, if you could find those transitional points, like where some of these like groups of deer hang out, because we talk about there being pockets of deer all the time. It's like there's a lot of deer down here, and that was in South Alabama. That's like there's a lot of deer there, right. But they're still in pockets. It's not like there's just literally deer behind every tree. They still are living roughly in pockets. So it's like if you find one pocket of bucks and another one, it's like where do they kind of overlap? And then playing your odds in that spot, that could be like a potentially really good tactic.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and the thing is, too, people kind of forget that bucks are territorial. And see, does kind of are, too. Does don't like to be around other does when they're in estrus. Like, that's one thing I noticed at my house. Like, when I put up those cameras, about a week before the bucks ever showed up, any of the bucks, all of the does disappeared, and there would be 1 or 2 feeding at a time. Whereas they were in there together every single day. You know what I mean? And all of a sudden they busted up just like a bachelor group would. But it's almost like, I don't know if y'all ever hit an estrus can when a doe's walking through the woods, but it will turn them inside out. They don't like it, and they do not like estrus. Like the smell of estrus, like a lot of does, when they smell it, man, they don't like it. And a lot of times they may not blow at it, but they'll get out of there. It's almost like they don't want to get bred. It's like they know this doe's in heat, and they don't want a buck to know that they might think it's them. They just don't like it. So it's like they don't stay together. Which hen turkeys, they do the same thing, very similar. And I think that what a lot of people forget about is that if you've got a bachelor group of bucks, like let's say you got a feed tree with all these bucks, well, when they bust up, there's no telling how far they're going. And then other bucks are coming to where they were at. But it's all what they know of where their does are at every year. So like bucks may be leaving, not even knowing there's does there in heat, when other bucks are going there to find does that are in heat. But at the same time, if you've got these 5 bucks, well, if you've got saddles and all these different terrains a mile away, you're going to find all of those deer in those spots. And they might be traveling that loop where their epicenter was that feed tree and a thicket that is their normal bedding area. And then these other bucks may be the same thing, the next bachelor group. So, probably if you found the bachelor group's early season, you might be able to establish where the center of that circle would meet based on the exact center of those 2 bachelor groups, in that area.
I'm just
because usually they're
curious.
going to stay away from each other. Like when, like a family group of bucks, like if they're in a bachelor group, they will usually be on the same camera here or there, but they won't be together. I mean, they'd be fighting. But a lot of times you won't see bucks like what you're talking about. They're in a creek. They may not go off into this other creek with these other bucks. It may be the same 5 over here and the same 5 over here. But I do think where those circles would cross.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think you could probably almost predict that if you already knew where bachelor groups were at.
Yeah. I'm just curious with like your interest in cameras. What has been your experience with bachelor groups and how bucks relocate? Because the reason I ask is specifically in pine thicket country where there's a lot of logging, we've had it years in a row now. And this goes back to like when me and Pike were running cameras years ago, and that where I killed my glade buck that I mentioned earlier. We found that, I mean, yeah, some of them would disappear, but a lot of them would not. A lot of them would be right there. Like they did not shift.
Yeah, the last 4 or 5 years, the biggest deer that we've got, usually, well, I say the biggest, the most mature, the biggest body deer we've got is usually the only one that stays. The next 2 biggest will be on camera during the rut, but we can't find them almost. It's like they show up one day. The most mature one, he may be on camera making that loop. He may come through there 4 days in a row during daylight hours. But now his buddy that's like his competition, he may come through there one day. But it's almost like, they, like I said, they're competitive. So they're not going to just stay in there and fight for a doe if they don't really have to. But that's what we've seen. And we've also seen, I mean, we've got on some of the cameras where we had like 8 bucks in one bachelor group. I mean, you may lose 4 of them. You may not see them again until the next spring. Yeah. They may just show back up again. But I really think that in some of those situations, you might actually have fewer does or whatever. And I think a lot of those bucks will have, like where you're talking about these doe pockets or deer pockets, it may be like some of these bucks leave and go to this doe group, and some of these bucks leave and go to this doe group. And then they establish their travel areas, and then they all come back.
Mm-hmm. So
I got one more thing.
What are you talking for 45 minutes?
I know. Listen. Look, you need to be more aggressive with your questions.
I tried. I tried. You just cut me off.
Yeah, he's all but cussing you out.
Yeah.
So, all right. Getting back to the heart of the conversation, the trail cameras. What I like so much about this is that most of the listeners can probably already go look at past trail camera data and apply what you're talking about. And I want to kind of keep pulling at that thread and continue down that conversation and expand on it a little bit more. But just out of curiosity, a situation that I guarantee a lot of listeners have, and we have, is we went and pulled some cameras after we interviewed you the first time, which we didn't talk about this stuff on the podcast. We talked about it before and after the podcast, and we're, like I said, holding out on the audience. But since then, we went and pulled a camera. And this camera's got a lot of daylight bucks on it. It's got a couple really nice daylight bucks. One in particular that we have is just a hammer of an 8-point, like very matured stud 8-point. And we had him, I believe, in daylight like 1 or 2 times. But we had him chasing a doe, like full on grunting, chasing a doe at 1 o'clock in the morning.
Right.
What's your take on that? Because just to color it a little bit more, my take on it, or like my brain immediately goes to like, well, even though it's 1 o'clock in the morning, that doe's hot right then, and he's on her.
You can kill him. Yeah, you can kill him during daylight right there too. He may have come through there just not on camera, but in those periods, those dates that I'm talking about, like if you get a date range of about 6 or 8 days, you might have half your daylight pictures and half your nighttime pictures. But now you might also get nighttime pictures the rest of the year, depending on where your cameras are at. Like I've seen a lot of guys that get consistent nighttime pictures. They're usually the ones that have a lot of trouble shooting the bucks, is where they're getting picture after picture after picture. And it's always at night, but it's like where that buck is at that point in time in that spot. But if you've got bucks chasing a doe, I mean, they're going to chase more. I mean, they don't even hardly eat or sleep. I mean, when it's those 3 days that those does are in estrus, I think you got to hunt it.
Dude.
I mean, especially if you've got a specific date range and you've got daylight pictures. I mean, because it's rare now. A buck, I mean, he's liable to get behind a doe and chase her for 5 miles down through the woods in one straight line and goes past 10 cameras. I mean, you never know exactly. But if you've got multiple bucks on camera in a specific date range, I would even say if you've got cameras up for 4 months and every buck you've got on cameras in 10 days and it's all at night, it just happened to be all at night. But I would still sit there those dates.
Okay.
That's because, I mean, a camera's not going to catch everything, and you don't realize how little you miss on camera until you start hunting dates and just going and climbing in a tree when you're supposed to without a camera on the tree. Mm-hmm. Because when you know this is where I kill a deer every year, every one that you shoot in there is going to be on a different trail, on a different ridge by a different tree. You can kill them out of the same tree.
Yeah.
But, I mean, you can have a mock scrape down there, and he's liable to wind it from 100 yards up the hill. You know, like, I mean, I killed 2 last year out of the same spot, and both of them deer were 200 yards apart. You know what I mean? Out of the same tree, but I wouldn't have gotten a picture of either one of them those days.
Yeah.
So it's, I mean, there's a lot of it, like the cameras are useful when it's a spot you're not going to hunt anyway. But I think as far as listeners go and stuff, but most people don't get to hunt often. And most people they don't have that much time off of work. But they do have data from what other people they know have killed, the data that they've seen, deer that they've seen, and deer that they've killed. So, like, if you've killed a few bucks over the last 20 years and you still have access to those properties, what most people never do is think about the exact date. It's just, even if you kill a deer the same week, like when we were in Selma, it was always the last week of January. It's like, well, I mean, we hunt all year long and then we all get lucky the last week. Well, I mean, we never even put 2 and 2 together. But we could have just gone and done something else all winter long. You know, it's not like, I mean,
you know, it's just shot ducks or something.
That's it.
Well, okay, Andrew.
One more thing. I've
got a lot to talk about.
Well, hey, that spot, by the way,
Jesus,
we had five shooter bucks in there, and we had like 3 that were younger up and comers. Every single one of them made it. We got pictures of every single one of them after season.
That's good.
That's so exciting.
Yeah,
you ought to come in there and kill one.
Well, I mean, I was going to say, I'll give you $1,000 to let me hunt those dates. It's going to be 5 days.
I'll let you do it for free.
Well, okay, I'll do it.
I'm for real. We're doing a camp. You should come.
Let's do it.
It'd be fun, man.
So
let's do it.
There's a 3-year-old in there that is probably the most impressive 10.3-year-old I've ever seen in Alabama.
Was a 3-year-old. Now he's a 4.
Oh, yeah, that's what I'm saying. And he made it through the year, and he was...
You know, if you bring me over, I'll accidentally shoot that deer.
I don't care. I just want to put hands on him, dude.
Yeah.
Oh, my gosh.
So there's a couple things I want to touch on. I want to talk even more about the calendar. You breezed past it a little earlier on the conversation, but to me, the calendar is one of the interesting things. Going back to like that listener, Drew, who I brought this up in our Patreon Hunters Hangout event, where like if you don't have a lot of time to hunt and building out this calendar based off what you're getting with trail cameras, because one thing we haven't really mentioned with the trail cameras, you still have to have some woodsmanship. It's not like you're just randomly throwing trail cameras.
No,
in the woods.
have to. Yeah, you've got to be able to find those trails because of. I mean, a trail camera doesn't pick up that good that far off anyway, and the more you put up, the cheaper the trail camera you're probably going to buy, which is going to make it even worse.
Yeah.
But if you do your job and learn how to, and like I said, y'all have got the information of how to find where the deer should be. But postseason scouting, I mean, you can't do it without postseason scouting. I mean, when you get that specific, especially with a camera, it's one thing to know an area where a good deer are killed, but it's another thing to know where they're standing and where they're walking. And the difference in even seeing a good buck and shooting him is the difference of knowing where they're standing. There's a lot of places, especially in Alabama, where you can't shoot over 50 yards, and you need to know that information. But once you find that, if you can get that camera right there on that trail where that rub, like I said, like with historical rubs, you know that line. If you can find 2 rubs that you can see from one spot, then you know exactly where he walked. And you can make a mock scrape and put a camera on that mock scrape, and you're going to get pictures of bucks. But then, like I said about the calendar, if you've got the important thing with the calendar is write down the dates, exactly what was on the camera and the name of the spot on those dates. But then take a 10-day window and put that date in the center, and write that spot down on every day. Because if you're at the mercy of off on the weekends or off on Thursday, like when I worked, I was off on Thursday and Sunday. So if I had to work on weekends, I'd only be off on Thursday. Well, you can go to that calendar and go to Thursday the 5th, and it will tell you, go get in the so-and-so tree.
As long as you put the information in.
You have to write down every day in your calendar needs a spot. I don't care if there was a buck on that day or not. Write down exactly what was on your camera on those specific dates. But then take 10-day blocks, unless you've got bucks. If you've got bucks every day of the whole deer season, that's awesome. You know what I mean? That's great. But you're going to have...
How big's the high fence?
Yeah, right. Exactly. You'll have, like in ours, we'll have there'll be like 5 or 6 days where we'll have bucks on a spot. And then we may have 4 or 5 days where we didn't get anything. And then on a different spot, we may have 4 or 5 days. Well, what we'll do is we'll just back up a few days before and after and write that same spot down on those dates. That way, if you happen to get a day off work, or if you happen to get off early or something stupid, you're just like, I think I'm going to go hunt today. I wasn't planning on it, but I'm going to hunt today. It's not like you're on the way to hunt. You have no plan, no idea what you're going to do. All you do is open up that calendar, look at that date, and you go to that tree. And you don't have to, at that point, you don't have to hang another camera, and then you don't have to buy 50 cameras either. Once you have that year's worth of data, you pull those cameras, write down your information, and transfer it to every calendar for every year after. That's what we do. And we don't write down the specifics anymore. We just take those dates and write down what tree we're going to get in. But no more cameras. We use those same cameras on new spots. And we always hang all of our cameras in spots we're not going to hunt. Like once you have 2 years, it takes 2 years. Listeners need to know that. Like your first year, you've got to scout. And don't worry about the time of year either. I think we talked about that before. The hotter that it gets, the more you can feel thermals. And that's very, very important for a person because we can't smell thermals. So like the best sign that we find, the easiest way we find sign in terrain is going in August. And it'll be 90 to 100 degrees. It's horrible. But if you take enough water and you go, you get down in there, then you'll feel that thermal switch. And the second you feel that air change, you're going to hit the historical rubs. Usually the historical rub line will be on that feel. It'll be a cold air hit you in the face.
Yeah, absolutely. We've experienced that too, especially like in areas of terrain where you coming off the top and it's like real hot and muggy, and then all of a sudden you hit a certain elevation line. And it can be different whether it's north-facing slope, south-facing slope, east to west.
It's all different. Even the same creek can have a different elevation wherever you're at. But once you find that spot, if you can get when those deer are there in that spot, then that camera is useless. I wouldn't just get that information and keep that information from now on, and you just keep building a library until your whole hunting season's over. We've got deer chasing does. The earliest I think was like October the 10th. We had deer, I say chasing does. We had deer on mock scrapes, pictures, daylight pictures, from October the 10th until March the 16th.
Mm-hmm. So same thing on some of our cameras.
So I mean, you can literally, if deer season was 6 months, I could just about hunt them on a mock scrape for 6 months during daylight.
Yeah.
Now,
another thing, Andrew, you stay quiet for a second. Okay. So with the calendars, kind of again staying on the calendar topic and everything here, you said it takes 2 years of information in order to have these areas laid out. Like you're going year one, you're scouting, you're putting cameras out. Year two, you're kind of expanding upon that, hopefully taking some of the information.
Well, I kind of cut off early on that, and that got messed up. But on year one, you're going to hang all your cameras. And you can hunt where the sign is and stuff, but you don't know the dates. So you end up doing like what we did. You're gonna sit, and you might see some deer, but until after the first season, when you check those cameras, then you're gonna know your dates. And that following year, you're gonna have about 8 or 10 days where if you don't shoot a buck, it's probably because you didn't go. I mean, that second year, and then after that, as long as you always do your postseason scouting, and don't scout the spots you already found the deer. After that, go to new places, scout new places every single year.
Different creek drainages, everything.
Everything. Different, and make it a long way off. Don't hunt the next, don't go to the next creek because you're probably going to be running into the same date ranges. So go 10, 20 miles away if you've got access to that. Or if you're in a hunting club with 3,000 acres, go to every property line, and try to make it to where you can spread your dates out to where you're not overlapping. That way you've got opportunity to kill 3 instead of 1, and then they're all done.
Yep.
But definitely, you definitely want to make sure that on the calendars, you just have to keep scouting. You've got to every year, if you scout new places, then the following February, you're going to be able to write down new dates. Otherwise, all you're going to have is that one thing of footage. Well, if you don't ever scout again, you've got those dates, and then you've got 2 more years before you're going to know if deer are in a new spot. You know what I mean?
So another thing, talking about the date ranges, and this is a good thing for listeners and viewers out there. If you've been running trail cameras for the last 3 or 4 years, 5 years, 10 years, you already have this information if you're already putting on some of the stuff we're talking about, some of these scrapes, these trails. And you can already start to do this. So it's not like you have to start fresh. If you've already been running cameras, you should have the data, whether it's 2 cameras or 50 cameras. You should already have the data of, getting that calendar out and actually going back and actually writing this stuff down. And also seeing if you've had the same cameras, the same spots, again, outside of bait piles and food plots, if they've been on some of the same scrapes, same travel corridors, if you already can see based off 2 years data, bucks are showing up, not be saying buck, but quality bucks are showing up in the same date ranges, you've got it finalized. Now move those cameras on. So that's the exciting thing about this is, you can already do that. We can do that now because, we've had some areas where we've had cameras out for a couple of years now. Yep. And it always seems around very specific, like you said, 5 to 10 day periods of time, there are 4 or 5 mature bucks that show up during daylight.
Well, I've talked to a lot of clients of mine that it's all the same story, and it's the same thing that I used to do all the time is you would have all these pictures, or you'd go put a camera up. And usually you'll check it. You'll put a camera up at a spot you never hunted on a scrape that just showed up. Well, then you go back and check it the next week, and you get a picture of a good buck on it. Well, then you try to hunt him for the next 3 weeks, you never see anything. And you hear that all the time. And that's what I keep telling people, the buck's gone. He's already left. He's on another doe on somebody else's camera. You missed him. By the time the scrape was there, you're too late. Usually. And by the time you get a picture of him, you're definitely too late because you should have shot that day. So there's so many big deer that we get one picture of a year. And I've got pictures of them for 3 years, one time, within 4 days. But if he's going to come through there one day a year in a 4-day period.
It's tough.
Well, if you're going to shoot him, you've got to be there that day, not your camera. And if you never got pictures of him, then by the time you get a picture and sit there, that was your chance. That's your 1 day out of 365. So it's really more specific than anybody believes that it is. Until you do it for yourself, it seems ridiculous.
Yeah. Well, another thing that's I think important to bring up is every deer has its own kind of personality. Yep. Some cover more ground than others, and I'm sure just like you, just like us, there are certain mature bucks that just want to be on camera. Yep. It's like they are doing the same thing. There's a 6-point or 7-point, the real big frame deer.
You want to call Tank?
Yeah. What is he?
He's a 7-point,
and he's just a
tank.
Yeah,
big old frame.
Just a tank, dude.
But that deer, he want to be on every freaking camera, every 2 days. I mean, it seemed like that.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Was he ever looking at the camera?
Yeah.
The deer that I've had that come to a bunch of cameras, that's the same deer that are always on camera, usually will walk up to the camera and sniff it. And I think it's curiosity. I think
gonna get him killed.
I think they're legitimately going and looking at, checking the cameras is why they end up in front of them.
Total side note, but talking about curiosity, have you ever? I had an old timer. I can't remember. It might have been Bobby Worthington. Bobby Worthington. I can't talk. Bobby Worthington might have told me this, or another older bow hunter that this is something that the guys were talking about back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, where they would take out a white 5-gallon bucket, plastic bucket. If they were bow hunting, they would put it like on like somewhere in front of their stand where like if a deer came out, it would stop and stare at that bucket because it was like they wouldn't leave it out there. They just put it out there when they hunt. And it was like that thing like the deer would like kind of stand there, look at it, give them time to draw back and shoot.
I've heard of that.
And
which I'm that way with dogs. Like I don't know if y'all ever kill bucks behind dogs, but I've done it like 3 or 4 times. As a matter of fact, I've videoed.
You're talking about like actually on dog hunts or just random dogs?
No, we're dogs just walking through the woods, and everybody's like, "Stupid dogs! I'm out of here. I'm leaving. My hunt's ruined." Yeah, I've killed like 3 bucks. I think it's maybe 4 now, off of behind dogs, like where dogs come through the woods. Like I videoed several last year. And people were like, "What in the world? You know, why didn't you? Well, I can't believe you just stayed in the tree. That doesn't bother you." Because I was up there filming myself. I'm like, "Here come the dogs, man!" Like, it means there's going to be a buck. Because it, like, I've learned, like, if a dog, the first time I ever did it was on that property by the house, a big old white Pyrenees or whatever, come walking off the hill off one of those trails, and I was like, "Dang it!" Because I heard him coming. I was like, "Man, here he comes," and it was a dog. Well, about 10 minutes later, here come a big old 8-point, eased off the hill and was looking. And he just come easing out of that pine thicket, come walking down there sniffing, smelling where that dog had gone. And I don't know if he saw the dog and got behind him and was following him on purpose. Because I think, more mature deer, I think it's kind of like a guy in the military. I think an older deer is going to keep up with somebody that's in the area. I don't think they really like losing track of predators. You know what I mean? Like, I think, now they may ease off and try to get away from them, but they can't go too far without getting shot. I think it's more of they kind of circle around behind them and either stay in a wind of them but there's been several different times when I had dogs come through an area and a little while later a mature buck will come in behind them, just kind of keeping up with them. You know what I mean? But it don't mess me up. Like I almost like to see them coming now.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I mean, I think there's something to like the curiosity aspect that, some deer may have it more than others, but it's interesting when you have cameras out. Again, like Andrew's cameras that he pulled, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago that had all these bucks on them, that a lot of them made it after season survived, is there's a handful of those bucks that they would be on almost every camera. And then the other ones, like the big 8-point, he was on a couple times, but he wasn't on just a ton. Yeah. And it's just like that's just an interesting factor, when you're running cameras is, when you're talking about like having these date ranges, you can almost, when you're looking at it, the way I see it is, again, you're not necessarily trying to shoot a specific deer, but if a specific deer has been daylighting a ton on a camera or a couple cameras in that kind of general area that you've got, you're running cameras on, there's a high chance that's going to be the deer you're killing. Very high chance. Right. And then you have a chance for all the other bucks that are potentially in the area. Because the way I'm looking at this is for one area in particular that we're hunting, and I didn't hunt it at all this year. Like there was one day I went out and I got out there late or something. I had to hunt like a different ridge system. I didn't make it to like the normal spot. And I ended up seeing some does. That was it. But it has been so consistent on when bucks are showing up. And again, we haven't done this yet, Andrew. We're gonna have to do this. Probably have to do it with Daniel. Go back to 2 years ago when we first got camera data, and then last year's data on that same ridge system. Yeah. And seeing exactly how consistent some of these bucks are coming in those specific date ranges. Yeah. Because the 1 year date range is interesting to me. 2 years date ranges would be very fascinating to see, and how accurate it is with these bucks coming up. Also, when we're talking about, again, kind of going to the whole calendar and hunting, based off the calendar, and using data that you're already getting, how important also like those visual observations are, where it's not just like you don't have to have them just on camera, but if you're sitting in a spot and you see that big buck.
So huge. I mean, it's a big deal, man, because some of those deer, like what you're talking about, you don't get on camera as much. We've got, like, when you're sitting in these spots, it's going to really amaze people. When you get a picture of 4 or 5 bucks on a trail, for instance, when you go and sit there the following year, starting several days before that starting, it's amazing how many bucks you see. Like you might see 4 or 5 bucks in a few day period, and none of them come in front of the camera. And half of them you never got a picture of. You know what I mean? Now half of them you did, but they didn't come in front of the camera again either. And the camera didn't scare them off. But half of them may be traveling. There was a picture. There was a big 7-point we got on camera 2 years ago, and went in there. He was a nice deer. I mean, he wasn't quite a shooter. So I mean, like we saw him I think we saw him 4 times, but he traveled the same trail every day. But that one time he'd come in front of the camera, we had a picture of him. Well, every time I ever saw him, he was never in front of the camera. You know what I mean? So it was like he come in front of the camera one day, But all the other times that wasn't his favorite trail, but I could have shot him every single day. But you see a lot of deer, like just in general. You don't realize how few of them walk the same exact trail day in, day out. And even if they're chasing does. I mean, a buck chasing a doe, people look at that as a very random event. But if you're right there where all the bucks are always on camera, usually if they're chasing a doe, they're going to be within gun range of where you're sitting. So that's also very, very important with those dates. You can usually end up on top of a buck and a shooter buck. I mean, if you've got shooter bucks on camera in a date range, then year after year, even if it's like you said, if it's not the same deer that you're looking for, it may be a buck you didn't even know existed in the area, but is a really nice buck. We have one spot last year. We only had 2 cameras on, and we all know 5 or 6 different people that had pictures of like 5 or 6 different bucks, and we had pictures of every one of them within the same 4 days. Whereas they had pictures of 1, and he had pictures of 1, and he had pictures of 1, we had pictures of 5. Just because we weren't hunting that one specific bed, we're hunting just basically a trail. But, like I said, the advantage of the trails to me is that you can pick your spot where you don't have to, like with the community scrapes, that's a good place to get a picture. But to me, there's so many deer that come to that spot. I don't like having a camera there. Not to mention the fact that if somebody else finds a community scrape, that's where they're going to be sitting. So it's also a place to leave yourself vulnerable to show up to your favorite spot on your favorite dates, and there's already somebody there. Whereas if you find a spot along that loop, that's why I like historical rubs so much, because people don't give them any credit. If you find rubs from years ago that lead to a community scrape, every single buck going to that community scrape is using that trail where that rub is. So if you find one rub the size of a golf ball from 10 years ago, you can kill every one of them bucks right there, and it doesn't look like a deer's ever even lived there. But it gives you a spot a half mile away that nobody ever hunts, where you can go there every single day.
Well, another thing that you told me, which I found interesting, because now you're hunting, you transitioned the last couple of years to public land and had some success doing so by applying this, is you don't really care about whether or not somebody's hunting that spot, as long as it's not, like you said, like the date range that I know it's going to be good, nobody's going to beat me to that spot. But if somebody goes in there the week before, the week after, it doesn't bother me one bit.
Yeah, right. They can have it. Yeah, they can completely have the spot. It's like it don't really bother me if somebody knows where I'm hunting. Like people always ask me about, what if somebody finds your truck or this and that? And I'm like, well, if I'm there, it's already too late for them, because by the time I leave, so did the deer.
Yep.
So that's kind of what I focus on is, by the time I'm there, if I know those dates and I'm confident in those dates, then it's going to get me up at midnight. I'm going to be there. And I'm going to be in the woods. 3 hours before anybody else sets their alarm, I'll be in a tree. And then I'm going to hunt there until my last dates, and then I'm going to leave. And when I leave, they can have it the rest of deer season. Because I've learned from camera footage, the bucks are gone. They can hunt there every single day. There's not a deer there. They've moved on. Somebody else is getting pictures of them. But, it's kind of like early season. Like I've never done a whole lot of preseason scouting and stuff because of my shop. I'm usually getting everything ready, and bow season I start getting real busy and stuff like that. So with me, it's more predictable. I'm better off going and sitting where I've got 8 bucks on camera in a 3-day period than I am trying to kill 1 buck in a bedding area. So I've just never put a lot of, so like for me, I'm always watching Facebook and stuff like that, where it's like, God, like I'm watching all these deer get shot. And I'm like, man, if y'all just give me a few more weeks, y'all better hurry up.
Well, one thing, I think he told Michael Perry, I think he interviewed him for his channel or something, and you kind of like called your shot about like a certain date range.
Predicted, yeah. Well, I had 2 different dates that we had. I had 9 bucks, 9 shooters on camera in 2 different dates, not 9 twice, but total. And I told him, I said, man, one of these, either these dates or these dates, like I'm going to kill a big buck. It's going to be like 130 or whatever. And he said, hang on a minute. And he pulled his phone out and started video. And he said, say that again. I said, I'm going to kill a big buck, and these dates. And he was like, well, how big is it going to be? And I was like 127 inches or 126, whatever I said. It was 127. And I ended up, instead of the second one, because the second date range I picked, I had 4 bucks that were all 120s, 130s. Within like 3 days. Daylight, and 2 of them come out there twice the same day. It was like, these days I'm going to kill. Well, the first date ranges, I ended up shooting one of them then, and it was a 126 and 7/8. I think I missed it by 1/8 of an inch in like 14 days or something like that. But which worked out good. I was like, well, I was a little early, but it worked.
Yeah, but again, that's just the interesting thing. Again, a guy that doesn't have a lot of time, if you can build out that calendar and kind of figure out just where you need to be, it's like there's no guesswork as in, well, what spot do I want to go to today? Like you already have it written down.
You're at your best. That's your best advantage. I mean, you're 100% the best chance you've got to be deer hunting. I mean, if you've got one day to go and you've done all that homework and know, and the only better way you've got to kill a buck is if you've got a buck that specific date. If the day you're off, you've got a buck that comes through there those dates every year, and there's a very good chance you can go in there and kill him.
Now, one question I think a lot of people are probably wanting to be heard or be asked and hopefully answered is, what about wind? What about?
I don't care.
Okay.
Wind's useless. Wind's useless. Moon's useless. If you get a buck, and you know,
Michael Pike's behind the camera squirming when he said
I know.
moon.
Look, he might want to take you outside and fight
well,
you if you just said that.
there again, I'll put $1,000 on it. I'm to a point where I bet on it. Like I don't care. And the thing is while if I showed you camera footage of let's say Perry's buck, 196-inch deer, he gets pictures of him 3 pictures in 3 years. Well, if that deer comes through there in a 4-day period, 3 times in 3 years, are you not going to go in there those 3 days because of the wind's wrong? If you get a picture of a 196 once a year, do you not go that week? If it's the same exact days, I mean, what do you do?
That's a good point.
So how do you handle?
But there again,
Yeah.
the bucks that I'm killing in all my spots, if you go in there and climb, I mean, I'll go sit in the same tree and kill one 50 yards in front of me. 2 days later, kill one 100 yards behind me. I mean, it don't matter. The wind, wherever the wind's blowing, unless you're bow hunting and it's hot, I mean, that's imperative. Like you can't, it's almost impossible to kill a deer with a bow in the wrong wind. You know, it's tough in hot, weather anyway. But during the rut, when those deer are traveling through there, I mean, I don't think I've ever had a deer, aside from a doe maybe, but when bucks are rutting, they are traveling. They're walking, they're looking for does, or they're chasing does. And I've never even had one act like I was even in the world. You'd be up there jumping around in circles. I mean, I'm up there filming, spinning around in my saddle, and they don't even care. But there again, you're at the mercy of those dates. In my opinion, the way I feel about it is if you need a north wind to hunt a spot, but that you've got a 10 point that's in there the last 3 years between the 3rd and the 5th on the same dates one time a year, well, if you've got the wrong wind for those 3 days, you might as well just wait till next year. You ain't going to get a picture of them the rest of the season. You're just wasting your time. If you wait on the wind, you're deleting so much opportunity. And like I said, I'll put some money on them. If y'all should show me some dates, y'all get pictures of bucks and don't want to hunt it because of the wind, just let me know.
So that's one thing. We didn't specify this earlier, but we are talking majority of everything we're talking about. Pretty much everything is rifle hunting. We're not talking about bow hunting.
Yeah.
So just rifle hunting.
This is rut. This is rut rifle hunting.
This is Alabama, baby.
This is
we gun
this
hunt
is shooting
Alabama.
deer. Yeah. This is killing deer.
Yeah.
Now, do you do anything to try to mitigate the wind? Like, let's say it's a spot that sets up for a north wind and you got a south wind. Yep. Are you accessing it different? Or are you getting in a different tree that's on the north side of the trail?
Yeah, I mean, like typically, like if I've got, like, I mean, obviously you're dealing with mostly a north wind, usually during gun season. But what I'll usually do is try to pick a spot on those loops where I'm going to be at the advantage of a perpendicular wind. So if you can set up where the wind's not blowing down the trail,
okay. If
you can set up to where it's crossing it, where you've got like a north and south, and the trail is this way, perpendicular. East and west. Yeah, I forget we're on a podcast. I'm sitting here doing stuff with my hands. But like, I do a lot of saddle hunting now. So like I'll go in there depending on what the wind's doing. I may climb to either side. I may get on either side of that trail based on the wind. But with that wind crossing that trail or crossing a hillside, if the bucks are going the other way, I mean, it's not enough. I mean, I've never had any trouble with it at all. But I do keep that in mind. I don't want to set up on a part of that trail where the wind's going to be blowing down it, because you don't have to. If you look, like during bow season, I mean, if you're hunting a trail coming from bedding to food, it's important, very important. But when you're hunting those loops, I mean, you've got an entire circle. I mean, you can drive for 45 minutes to different spots, and scout that same loop. That's why I was saying make sure to mark all of the sign, no matter how big or small it is, because as long as you can keep up with that trail, you can follow it across multiple creek systems. And every single time, and all you got to do, man, if somebody knows somebody that tracks dogs, I mean, ask if you can go with them one night when somebody shoots a deer.
Oh,
And
you were talking about that with Blaine.
You know, see what those deer do when they hit those bluff gaps and stuff. Like a lot of times you may already know where that sign is, or you may know where that terrain is, but you don't realize that those deer come up through it and then wrap back around and end up back where you started at to begin with. You know, and that is the loop. You know, and anywhere on that loop, if you can find a place where you can access it better and make less noise and get in there straight line, you know, especially in the morning, if you're going to hunt in the morning and get in there, because I mean, typically I don't hunt evenings either. Like I hunt mornings and I get up, I hunt high. And if you can get down a ridge, you can come straight through their bedding area. I mean, whatever you need to do is if you can get to that trail from up top and just get in there and get on it, then you know, you then you can kill them. I mean, it's really easy as long as you do your scouting.
So we mentioned that a lot of people can do this with trail camera pictures that they already have, but a lot of people are going to be starting from scratch, whether they don't have the data or they're hunting a new area. And this year I'm playing the long game with a certain spot. It's far from the house and it's really hard to access, but I think it'll be worth it. So I'm going to go in there and put some time into it I'm looking at this like over the next 10 years, I'm going to kill some deer in here. And I'm going into I know. And so you mentioned earlier from like a terrain perspective, you're looking at where everything kind of connects, whether it be like saddles or bluff gaps or thermal hubs, and you're looking for that loop and where everything connects. Well, when you walk into an area and you start breaking it down, you've also mentioned that you don't necessarily need to see like heaps and heaps and heaps of deer sign to be there. Right. So like, let's just say that let's say you have a spot where everything just makes sense from a terrain standpoint. You got a bluff gap over here, a bluff gap over there, a saddle right here, and you've got like a perfect little hub in the middle of it, and you hit that and you start scouting around it and you just don't find a lot of sign. Does that discourage you? Do you struggle to find a spot to put a camera at? Like, how do you approach that? Because I know you hunt pretty low deer density areas.
Right.
So.
If I don't find sign that a mature buck has ever lived there, like the best thing that I can find in an area is a historical big rub. A big historical rub means that a big buck rubbed that tree. I mean, I'm talking about something that you know was not a spike. You know what I mean?
Do you pay attention to also like how high the tine marks are on that tree?
No.
No?
No.
Just about diameter?
I don't, I mean, you know, because I mean, I do taxidermy. I mean, you see deer that have been on camera for 6 years at somebody's house and the tines are different lengths every year. You know, sometimes there'll be a 160, then could be a 140 the next year. Same rack, but be 20 inches smaller. You know, so some of that stuff to me, like and it doesn't really matter because I'm looking at it like you're talking about. I'm looking at it for the next 20, 30 years of my life. It's like if I don't get to hunt next year, but I get to hunt the year after, I know I can go get in this tree because these rubs are here and I know what dates the deer are.
Talk about the rub you put a camera on with Pablo.
Yeah, the one that we put his camera on. Like that rub, we found it 2 years ago or 3.
Is it that long ago?
2 years ago. It was the first year we scouted.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, it was the first year we scouted before we put up the cameras. We did not have a camera in there that day. And found this rub. It was a really nice, big rub. And it was by itself. There was no scrapes, no other rubs, no nothing.
Terrain features?
There was a saddle up above it. I went up there and scouted the saddle, didn't find any sign, not even historical rubs, didn't find anything. But there was a pine thicket running that ridge. So, I mean, it just screamed bedding area, you know, but it just wasn't a whole lot to it. And there's not a lot of deer in the whole area, you know, so it wasn't one of those things where it was like, let's come back in here with a camera, but maybe next year if we come in here, we'll put one up all deer season because we found it late. Well, we went in there with Pablo, and I told him, I said, bring a camera. Let's go over here because he wanted to go scouting with me. And I was like, we'll go over here, and I want to show you a spot that I think's got potential, but we need a camera. And we need to put it up, and we need to leave it up all deer season. I said, don't hunt it. So we took his camera in there and put it on that rub, literally. We just put it on a tree, just looking at that tree, just a rub. And didn't make a mock scrape or anything. He put it up in like August. And he pulled it in, I think it was late December or January, something like that. And we had there were 4 different bucks that hit that tree, and about 6 does come by there one day in a group. I mean, there's not even a trail there that you can see. I mean, aside from them crossing that saddle that's way up above it, but those bucks were like hanging out right there. They weren't even feeding, but you would have them on camera for like, we had a camera. I always set my cameras on video mode. I hadn't mentioned that, but what we started noticing is if you have a doe cross, especially during the rut, a lot of times a doe will come by and about 10 seconds later, a buck will be behind her. And in that trigger speed, there's so many times that people would either get the butt end of a doe and think, I wonder what that was, and then never get the buck, or get a doe on camera and never the buck. And there's also been times where we had 2 bucks come through behind a doe in that 15-second clip. So you start really realizing the potential of what's on your cameras by running the video mode. But what we saw there is these bucks would come in there and almost just like stage up. And it was in the bottom of a creek in wide open hardwoods. And they would just walk down there, and when they get to that rub, they'd stop. And they would just look around. And I don't know if that wind was sucking up that creek system and they could smell, but they were acting like they do in a thermal hub, where they walk to a spot on the side of a cliff and just stop. Sometimes they'll stand there for an hour. They're just standing. And that's what these deer were doing at that tree.
During daylight.
During daylight. And this was, I mean, for 2 weeks in a row, they would just come in there and stand there. And then one day we had a nice, about a 3-year-old nice 10-point with a really nice 8-point come in there and got to fighting. And they fought for like 5 15-second clips. Like the camera just kept going off. And we got those deer fighting the entire time on camera until finally one of them run the other one off. During daylight, it was like 10 in the morning, you know, in like November, December, whenever it was. And it was, all that was just a rub, you know, but it was a big tree, and it had been rubbed. When we found it 2 years ago, it was not freshly rubbed. It was a historical rub. And my buddy Jeremy actually hunted that saddle a couple of times and saw some does, never did see a buck. Well, when we went back, because I've been videoing everything on YouTube, and I go back and watch those videos after we got the pictures, and I was like, when was he hunting that? So we went back trying to find out what dates he was hunting it. We were there about 2 weeks early. If he had been there 2 weeks later, the bucks probably weren't even there yet. So if we'd been there 2 weeks later, he might could have shot one, you know. But when we went back after the season and they're scouting, that tree had been freshly rubbed. So at some point in time. So that's why I wanted to go back in there with Pablo and put a camera up on it and see what happened. And it had gotten rubbed from the time Pablo put the camera up, you know. So it was kind of cool, like seeing what happened just with that specific tree, because we still haven't found another tree in the whole area. But it showed us where bucks were at during daylight, you know. And you know, you might be able to get a picture of a deer there in the dark, but we never did. Mm-hmm. There was never a buck on that camera in the dark. So it was almost like the days they were there during daylight, they were always there in daylight, and it was there about 4 or 5 days and nothing else the rest of the year.
Is Pablo going to try to kill one there this year?
Oh, yeah. Yep. As a matter of fact, we put up another camera for him in another spot that he found several years ago, and he'd seen a couple of good deer in there just hunting, but he never put a camera up. We went in there and put a camera up and still haven't pulled it yet. So really interested to see what's on that camera, because he put it up in August and did not go in there. He ended up, you know, he got hurt, wasn't able to hunt. So he never sat there this year. That camera stayed there all season, and we've got to pull it and see what's on it. That'll be interesting, because that was a good spot too.
I was texting Pablo the other day.
Good sign. Really?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we got to get him on.
Oh, yeah. Andrew, what you got?
Dude, I think I'm going to try this with several different areas, because, I mean, the thing is I got the way that we hunt. I mean, I don't know how much you do this actually. Like we're somewhere different pretty much every month, and we like chase the rut around the state. And correct me if I'm wrong, but you're talking about chasing the rut like around your area where you're hitting different doe groups. I see this as a really good way for people who like to chase the ruts, where it's like, okay, I got this WMA that's 2 hours north. I got this one that's 3 hours south. I got this one that's over in Georgia. And starting this process on all those places you're interested in hunting long-term, and start getting those dates and building that calendar out.
And I think, too, something else, when you say chase the rut, people need to stop looking at that so much as hunting that doe. I think that will help them kill a lot more bucks. Don't look at it as chasing the rut, because the ruts, I can hunt the rut from October to March at my house. I can hunt it from November to January at my old hunting club on 3,000 acres. I can hunt the rut. I mean, I've killed deer chasing does. I mean, my old hunting club, we had 3,000 acres. I killed 3 bucks in one season chasing does 3 months apart. You know what I mean? But I'm hunting does. You're hunting one doe for 3 days.
So that's like the shotgun approach. You're like the precision rifle approach.
Yeah.
Like it's
awesome for somebody that's got 10 acres. Like there is no better strategy for somebody that has got no land. Like if you've got your granddad's back 40, if you've got a scrape or a trail or you know there's bucks there or rub, whatever, and you know where the deer are usually at, you can make a mock scrape, put a camera on it in September, and in 2 seasons, you will kill a buck off that property. I don't know how big it will be.
Yeah, we got listener questions
but
about that.
There will be tons like that. That's, to me, the most common guy that deer hunts a small block of private property, and you will not find a better way. And I proved that at my house. Like there was, I mean, I've got a 3-year-old 8-point that's a beautiful buck that I promised my wife I wasn't going to shoot. And I told her he was there 2 years ago on November the 17th. He came through there this year on the 15th. He showed up for the first time. The next day he came in there again at the same exact time. He came in there at 7:45 and at 8 o'clock, 2 days in a row. Never saw him before, never saw him after. The same buck was there, identical, a year younger. The same date a year ago. And I told her, I said, next year, I said, if he'll survive this season, next year, you go back there and sit on these dates and you'll kill him. And she took off work already. She asked off next November for 3 days in November. I got a picture of that deer the end of February. Him, 3 other bucks, and 2 does come walking across my pasture, and I got him on video at the back of my camera, way off the back of the field. That buck come walking by. I told her, I said, he's alive. I said, he lived through the season. I said, so next year, December the 14th, you're going to kill him. I said, all you got to do is hit him. I said, if you can shoot him, he's going to come through there 1 or 2 days. He'll be standing there. And it's, like I said, I mean, I've got 13 acres. You know, and if she can kill a 4-year-old 8-point, I mean, this buck he was 160 pounds this year. You know, I mean, if she could kill a 125-inch 8-point 4-year-old off of my 13 acres because she took off 3 days of the whole year, anybody can. You know what I mean? I mean, if you've got deer crossing your property during deer season, you can shoot a buck off of it. You just have to know what day. You know, but there again, like you're talking about chasing the rut, you can chase the rut in a hunting club. You know, if you've only got access to one club. The main thing is don't just pay attention to the good stands. Go in there and get your map, especially if you've got data, because I mean it takes years to put up cameras and find that. But if you've got log books, most clubs keep log books, and all you really need is a year. I mean, if you've got a year or two, just look at the dates the bucks were killed and the stands they were killed on, and every single year it's going to be within that 5, 6, 10-day period in that spot, and there ain't going to be many bucks killed there in those spots the rest of the whole season. But it's just going to move around the club. And it's because this doe goes into heat, and this doe goes into heat, and this to go, and those bucks are all going to move to each one of those doe groups. We had one buck on that 3,500 acres, 3,000 acres. We had a big 10-point, had a split brow tine and like a split G2 or something. He was a big buck, but very unique. Like one of those you knew it was that deer on camera. And a good friend of mine shot that deer and hit him in the leg in a cutover. And he was on the property line on the west side of our club. Well, this was in I think it was like the last week of November. It was where I'd talked to y'all about one of the first times I ever hunted those dates, and I shot that big 9-point, weighed 240 pounds.
Marion County?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And he was chasing. It was 3 bucks chasing a doe at the last week of November. Like when nobody, I mean, out there, nobody's even out there hunting because the rut is the week after Christmas. Is what everybody always says. Well, we had seen where all these deer were getting killed in this area, early December, late November. Went in there and shot that deer. Well, anyway, my buddy shot this giant over there in the same spot, chasing a doe, end of November. Well, he lost the deer. You know, he hit it bad. Well, January, like the 15th or 18th or something, on the east side of our club was where one of my other circles was at. And a guy killed that deer out of a green field. He walked up there with a doe across 3,000 acres. He was literally on the last, I'm talking about 100 yards from the property line on both sides. The same buck had gone to no telling how many does across that property. You know, just doe, you know, just going, and they don't just travel looking for does. They're going where they know the does are going to be in estrus, and they breed them and they leave and go to the next one. That's why I think you see the big ones show up before the sign. You know, I think they just, the more the years they do it, it's like, okay, you know, Betty's done. It's time to go to Madonna, you know what I mean, or whatever. And they just head on out, you know, and they just go over there. And, you know, whether you get pictures of them at the doe area or traveling, you just, when you get a picture of where they're at during the day, then that's where you sit those dates next year. And every deer, like I said, the does are going to keep doing that. The families of does, as they go into estrus those same times, every buck year after year after year, it just stays the same. I mean, we saw it for after I started figuring all this out, I started going back like way like 20, 30 years ago and looking at pictures I had taken when I was a teenager of bucks I had killed off of specific spots that were some of my favorite places I ever saw, like certain trees where I killed like 5 and 6 bucks, and I'd kill all of them within like 3 days. And I'm sitting there thinking, I've hunted these stands for 3 and 4 weeks every year and killed every buck I ever killed in a 3-day period, you know, off of that tree. You know, and I didn't realize I could have gone to like 10 trees in the whole club. I just kept hunting that one spot till I got lucky, you know, but come to find out I could have done a lot better if I had had separate dates.
Start now.
Yep.
Get your dates lined up, get your calendar built out, and then start planning for some success. I'm interested in trying this again on a couple different areas. I'm trying to think.
I don't know if you're organized enough to try this.
Well, you get it depends on whether or not you give me access to the photos, because you get all the photos right now.
Well, the main thing is
How
it's
much
like,
money you got?
like stuff that y'all have done in the past. I mean, if you've shot bucks before, you've killed plenty of bucks. Just go back and look when you killed all of them and where you were at.
Oh, well, we've already talked about that. Like, the one I killed like Black Friday week.
Well, like the day that y'all hunted together. I mean, there is no possible way I wouldn't be sitting right there in that tree that day.
But which is it? The one where we killed the 2 in the same one?
Yes.
Okay, so that one, that's an SOA. So we'd have to draw that one.
Well, but I mean, even if you draw
Listeners.
if you draw it 10 years from now,
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
it's that date. You know, if you can.
I've got my SOA strategy narrowed down to 2 places and 2 hunts. That's the only thing I put in for now. I don't put in for anything else except those 2 different SOAs, 2 different weekends on each one.
Yeah.
Anyways,
If you draw,
and I'm not saying what they are.
No, but listeners, if y'all draw an SOA, you don't have a buddy go with you.
Get a +1.
I'll come guide, get you a deer, and then
will.
we'll switch the guns out.
Yeah, you'll strip down to your underwear.
Yeah,
So
you
well,
know,
you don't care. You'll do what you got to do.
Whatever. Listen, we'll cross that water one way or the other. You gotta do what you gotta do. I was looking at that video today after crossing that flood
I was
road
laughing
bed.
so hard.
I was like, man, I'm about to have to swim out of here, man. And those
Man,
skivvies.
see, the sad part about that, though, is that his motivation ran out by the end of the hunt. And he didn't do that, and it started raining. So he was driving around in the truck, and he drove up right where I told him to go hunt. And there was a big one standing there.
Yeah, I didn't want to sit there because it's thunderstorm. I decided to sit on a different little interior road bed on that little parcel. And yeah, I should have went there.
Came around the corner in the truck, and
gigantic.
there he was.
Did y'all write down the GPS and the date when the buck was standing in the road?
I mean,
I got it.
Because like
I got it. I don't know if he does.
Because I'm telling you, I'd be sitting there where the truck was parked.
You know what's funny? So we had listeners draw that same place and like in the same units the next week. I forgot how I got in contact with them or something, and I told them to go sit that same spot. And I cannot remember. They didn't shoot one, but they saw. I don't think they killed bucks, but they saw a bunch of bucks. They literally sat, I think the same tree Andrew sat in, and saw a bunch of bucks. And then another guy.
I'd hunted it every day, but we got flooded out. We couldn't get to it.
Yeah, my truck don't have a snorkel on it, so.
It was bad.
Oh, it was real. I'm telling you, like it was.
Yeah, I heard y'all talked about when I watched the video. I was like, that was worse than I was thinking in my mind.
But you know what's funny is the deer would walk across that crap like no
They don't
problem.
care.
They swim right across it.
They don't
Current, everything, logs floating across the road, and
when we hunted in Selma, we were on the Alabama River on the edge of it. Some of our stands, some of the green fields were on the lip where it dropped off into the sand, and you could watch does swim the river, the Alabama River.
Yeah,
I'm talking about they get in it and cross it, and they'd be 300 yards down the bank by the time they made it across. I mean, that's a big river.
There's a lot of gators in there.
They go off in it like it
it's
wasn't
like a topwater for a gator.
Yeah,
coming up for him. Real quick, Daniel, I want you to plug taxidermy, and I want you to plug your YouTube channel right now, and you can talk about your book.
Yeah, sure.
Now the book's been out for a little while too. So
yeah, my book's called The Mountain, and it's basically a story about from when I had heart surgery to when I killed my first buck on public property, and then my taxidermy business called Cedar Ridge Whitetails Taxidermy. That's on Facebook and Instagram, and I've got the Cedar Ridge Chronicles on YouTube, which I do some taxidermy how-tos and basically just chronicle whatever I do.
Yeah.
I've got all kind of fishing and hunting and stuff on there.
Yeah, Daniel's our official taxidermist. So, how many deer have you mounted for us now? It's been
Pretty good bit.
6, 5, something.
Probably 5.
Yeah.
I was thinking it's more than that.
I think it's at least 6.
I think it's probably 6 or
He's
7.
done at least 5 of mine, I think.
Yeah,
So-
it's several.
Yeah, but anyway, so yeah, it does awesome work. And then Mike's deer's over there right now. I've got all my deer back. I think. Yeah. I think I get all mine taken care of. because we picked yours up, Andrew, too. So anyway, other than that, super excited. Again, have you on, Daniel. Really interested to see what kind of listener success stories we have from this. And guys, again, if you're listening to this podcast or watching this podcast, write in just after hearing this conversation, if it maybe opened a door or, opened a different part of your mind of like looking back at past experiences of where you might have killed bucks in the same location, same tree, or whatever, same general area around the same dates, and just let us know, because I'm interested in getting other people's feedback on that and seeing, have they done this without knowing they were doing it?
A lot of people don't think about, because I didn't think about dates for a long time. I thought about time periods where it was like the end of January or the 1st of December, but you also key in more on the area and the time of day. When people check game camera pictures, they're usually looking at day time, like times, where it's like these deer are coming through here at 8 in the morning. Well, that also has become completely meaningless to me. Like if I've got deer during daylight, if I hunt daylight to dark, sometimes I shoot, like one of my bucks I killed this year was at 2 o'clock. We never got a picture past 8 a.m. in that spot, but I shot at 1. You know what I mean? And I mean, those deer could be in and out of there. If it's that few days in a row, I mean, at any time during the rut, daylight to dark, don't worry so much about the time stamp as you do the date stamp.
Yeah. Awesome. Perfect. Well, guys, we appreciate y'all watching this podcast. Appreciate y'all listening. Daniel, thank you for joining us driving down here.
Glad to be here.
And again, we'll catch y'all back here on the next episode from Southern Outdoors. And remember, guys, y'all stay Southern. Boom.
Bingo.